Hello everyone to PS class number 5. So it's psychological disorders, sleep and consciousness, and drug dependence. So I just have a few warm-up questions via Khan Academy, and we can go through them fairly quickly just for the sake of time. So question number one is, what is the main difference between an individual diagnosed with bipolar type 1 and bipolar type 2? So you could type your answer in the chat. That would be great. Does anyone want to share their answer? Okay, we can go over it together. So, the main difference between an individual diagnosed with bipolar 1 and bipolar 2 is that bipolar 1 it deals primarily with depression plus mania, whereas bipolar 2 is depression plus hypomania. So it's not as extreme as mania, but it's just a lower version of mania. So here the correct answer would be D. So question number two, which of these interactions between a doctor and a patient utilizes a biopsychosocial model? You could type your answer in the chat. So when for the thinking about the biopsychosocial model, so it's three components: biology, psychology, and sociology. So you could go over the responses one by one. So a doctor who diagnoses a patient with ulcers asks questions about stress management. So there is biology, and asking about stress management also deals with psychology as well. And also keep in mind the other model you're differentiating this model with is the biomedical model, which solely focuses on biology. So B is a doctor diagnoses a patient with migraines after asking questions regarding the length of time and the severity of the symptoms experienced. So this seems like it's mostly a biology. C is a doctor who diagnosed a patient with severe back pain, recommended changes to how the patient lifts objects. So this doesn't really deal with anything psychology or sociology related. It's also mostly biology related. D, a doctor, after diagnosing the patient with a broken foot, prescribed painkillers. So this is almost all biology. So here, the best answer would be a doctor who diagnoses a patient with ulcers asks questions about stress management. A stress management deals with a lot of things, including psychology and sociology. And question number three is, what stage of sleep is depicted by this EEG? So in this question, they give you K complexes and sleep spindles. So that's sort of a hint in terms of what stage of the sleep cycle it is. So stage one, non-REM, is mostly theta waves. Stage two is also more theta waves, and as well as K complexes and sleep spindles. And stage three is delta waves. So here, the best answer would be a stage two non-REM sleep with the K complex and sleep spindles. That's where they're found in the stage two. Lastly, which of these criteria is necessary for a biological rhythm to be described as a circadian rhythm? So number response number one is the rhythm must have a period of no more than 24 hours. So circadian rhythms are primarily 24 hours, but sometimes they differ, maybe 25 hours. So it's not exactly 24 hours, maybe slightly less or maybe slightly more. The rhythm must be expressed according to social factors that determine the period of the cycle. So here they're sort of tricking you with the question where it says the rhythm must be expressed according to social factors. The circadian rhythm is more of an internal rhythm determined from within you, opposed to something like outside factors determining the circadian rhythm, which is the response C. The rhythm must be internally generated. And this makes sense in terms of it's a biological rhythm, so it's internally generated. And lastly, D, the rhythm must reflect the light dark cycle. So this is also primarily for many people, it's a light dark cycle, also for many other organisms. But think about the people who work in the evenings. They have like an opposite circadian rhythm where they sleep during the day and then work during the night. So then it's the opposite. So here, the best answer would be C. The rhythm must be internally generated. So starting with psychological disorders, mental dis- mental disorders are disorders of the mind, mental illness, psychological, and psychiatric illness. Abnormal, there are abnormalities of the mind that cause distress or disability. Distress is a negative type of stress that builds over time and is bad for your body. It happens when you perceive a situation to be threatening to you to you in some way, such as physically or emotionally, and your body becomes primed to respond to that stress. And eustress is a positive type of stress that happens when you perceive a situation as challenging but motivating. Eustress is usually enjoyable, such as a challenge like one of your hobbies, and it's something's particularly challenging to learn, and you find it that is challenging, but you find it motivating as well. So that would be an example of eustress. And new stress is a neutral type of stress. New stress happens when you're exposed to something stressful, but it doesn't actively or directly affect you. So, speaking on the warm-up question, the biomedical versus biopsychosocial model. The biomedical model focuses on biological physical abnormalities. So abnormalities of a cell of the brain that might cause disorders or having abnormal pattern of connections between cells of the brain. So solely biology related. Whereas the second model is the biopsychosocial model. It also considers the biological physical abnormalities, but also includes psychological and cultural slash social factors that might be useful for cause or classification of a mental disorder. So here you can see a diagram of the biopsychosocial model of health. You see the psychological, the self-esteem, coping skills, social skills. There's also social, peers, family circumstances, school. And here is the biological, the same thing with the biomedical model of health. There are two classification systems used for psychological disorders. One is the ICD-10 and the DSM-5. They're similar but not the same. The ICD-10 is the International Classification of Diseases, the 10th revision. So it's the system from the World Health Organization. And there's 11 top categories. Two is the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the fifth edition from the American Psychiatric Association, or also known as the APA, and its 20 top level categories, which we'll be looking at today. According to the National Institute of Health, each year in the United States, about 25% of the population will meet the criteria for at least for one mental disorder, and 6% will have a serious mental illness that causes severe disability or distress. The types of the psychological disorders, there are many and several with overlapping features, and they're not due to the use of medication, drugs, or other medical conditions, etc. There's also cultural differences in psychological disorders. From country to country, something considered might be considered a disorder, but in another country it might not be. So sometimes the DSM-5 and the ICD-10 tries to standardize it across the world. There's neurodevelopmental disorders, which involve distress or disability due to an abnormality in the development of the nervous system, which includes intellectual disability, autism spectrum disorders, and ADHD. So, autism spectrum disorder is characterized by a variety of issues related to social and communication abilities. And first symptoms of the disorder typically include delayed language development and unusual communication patterns. Specific learning disabilities, they've all been removed from DSM-5, but a few examples are dyslexia, which is a reading difficulty characterized by problems with accurate or fluent word recognition, poor decoding, and poor spelling abilities. Dyscalculia is a mathematics learning disorder, and dysgraphia is a writing disorder. Developmental coordination disorder is characterized by difficulties in acquiring and coordinating motor movements. Second is neurocognitive disorders. So it's a loss of cognitive or other functions of the brain after the nervous system has developed. So the distinction between one and two is that this is when you're developing, whereas this is after development. And the big category between neurocognitive disorders, one of the big uh, disorders is delirium, which is a reversible episode of cognitive or higher brain problems. There are many causes, such as drugs, abnormalities in blood, and infections. So, delirium is something that you often check for in the hospital for patients. And dementia and its milder versions are usually irreversible and progressive, usually caused by Alzheimer's disease or stroke. Third is the sleep-wake disorders, result in distress or disability from sleep-related issues. They include insomnia and breathing-related sleep disorders, abnormal behaviors during sleep. Fourth is anxiety disorders, so the distress or disability from abnormal worry or fear. Some are specific to certain stimuli like phobias, while others are not specific to certain stimuli, including generalized anxiety disorder. Panic disorder involves panic attacks, so intense anxiety. Social anxiety disorder is a false cognition which leads to a fear of humiliation, embarrassment, rejection, negative evaluation, or rejection by others. Selective mutism is an anxiety disorder characterized by difficulty speaking in social situations, but the individual is developmentally normative in terms of their language and communication ability. So they have the ability to speak, but it's just difficult in terms of social situations. General anxiety disorders, individuals with general uh, anxiety disorder experience excessive and persistent worry or anxiety regarding many different spheres of life that cause distress, impairment, or maladaptive behavior. So the distinction between social anxiety disorder and GAD is that social anxiety deals more in terms of the social aspects of life, whereas general anxiety disorder is more broad. Fifth is depression, so distress or disability from abnormally negative mood. Mood refers to a long-term emotional state, which differs from emotion, which is more short-term. Mood is more long-term and not necessarily related to events. So mood, how someone feels, such as sad, becomes affect. How mood is displayed to others, such as crying. There's also hopelessness, loss of enjoyment in activities as well in depressive disorders. Six is bipolar and related disorders. So there's abnormal negative mood depression, but we also have periods of abnormally positive mood called mania. Mania is characterized by little sleep, talking quickly, making bad decisions due to impaired judgment, making bad decisions based on bad assessment of risk or abilities of a task. Seven is schizophrenia spectrum and other psychotic disorders, which involves distress or disability from psychosis. Psychosis involves delusions, fixed false beliefs not identifiable by experiences or culture. For example, one's thoughts are controlled by someone else or have superpowers. And there's also hallucinations, sensory perceptions without any stimuli. For example, hearing voices without a stimulus. With psychosis, disorganized thinking can occur in negative symptoms as well. Decreased emotional expression, decreased motivation, and decreased societal social behavior. So often when you think about schizophrenia, there's two types of symptoms. There's two symptoms that are related to schizophrenia are the positive symptoms and negative symptoms. A good way to differentiate them is that positive means something that you add to life, and negative means something that you remove from life. So some example of a positive symptom would be hallucinations, so hearing voices without the stimuli. And negative symptoms would be something that you remove from life, such as emotions or a weakened form of that uh, fact of life, such as emotions, there's motivation, social behavior. Schizophrenia has many of these features, while other psychosis disorders have some. Seven is trauma or stressor related disorders. Distress or disability occurs after stressful slash traumatic events, leads to mood, emotional, and behavioral abnormalities. An example is post traumatic stress disorder, which is common after wars or other traumatic experiences. Nine is substance related and addictive disorders. Distress or disability from the abnormal use of substances that affect mental function can cause mood abnormalities, anxiety symptoms, or psychosis, which also includes gambling. 10 is personality disorders, distress or disability related to personality. It involves long-term mental and behavioral features that are characteristic of a person. They involve ones outside uh, those accepted of societal norms. So there's three big clusters of personality disorders. Cluster A is odd or eccentric personality disorders. Cluster B is dramatic or unpredictable personality disorders. And cluster C is anxious or fearful personality disorders. 11 is disruptive, impulse control, and conduct disorders. Distress, disability from behaviors that are unacceptably disruptive or impulsive for someone's culture. Inability to control inappropriate behaviors. 12 is obsessive, compulsive, and related disorders, distress or disability from obsessions or compulsions. So, obsessions are thoughts that occur involuntarily, often unwelcome, and they occur repeatedly. For example, the obsession with hands always being dirty. And compulsion are activities that one must do that are often related to an obsession, such as if you have the obsession of that your hands are always dirty, then you may have the compulsion to wash them many times a day. 13 is some somatic symptom and related disorders. So distress or disability from symptoms similar to those that may occur to illness unrelated to mental disorder, but of psychological origin, with or without having a medical condition at the same time. Example is someone who has abdominal pain. It's caused by psychological disorders such as stress without any physical signs. 14 is feeding and eating disorders. So, distress or disability from behavioral abnormalities related to food. For example, anorexia nervosa, so where an individual takes in insufficient amounts of food. Another example is bulimia nervosa, which is where an individual binge eats and then they induce vomiting. 15 is elimination disorders, distress or disability from urination or defecation at inappropriate times or places, such as urinary accidents. 16 is dissociative disorders, distress or disability from abnormalities or of identity or memory. So this there's also dissociative identity disorder and people who have lost memories for part of their lives. 17 is sexual dysfunctions, distress or disability from abnormalities in or performance of sexual activity. 18 is gender dysphoria, distress or disability caused by a person identifying as a different gender than what society represents them as. 19 is paraphilic disorders, distress or disability from having sexual arousal to unusual stimuli. for a person's culture, and 20 is other disorders, distress or disability from a psychological disorder that doesn't fit into other categories. So I was wondering if anyone had any questions for psychological disorders, that section. We'll move on to the second section, which is sleep and consciousness. So, consciousness is awareness of ourself and environment. We can have different levels of consciousness and can be natural or be induced by external factors such as drugs or internal, such as mental efforts. Stages range from alertness to sleep. So, alertness means that you're awake, aware of who you are, what's going on in the environment. You can focus your attention and code info into your memory. Daydreaming, you feel more relaxed, not as focused, and can also be caused by light meditation, which is self induced. Drowsiness is just before falling asleep or after waking up, can also be self induced in deep meditation. And sleep, you're not aware of yourself or the world around you. EEGs can measure brain waves during sleep. So there's four main types of brain waves that you see. So there's alpha, beta, theta, and delta. These are just general brainwaves that you see awake or asleep. Each type oscillates at a different frequency and associated with a different type of consciousness. So beta is associated with being awake or concentration. Alpha is like a relaxed state or daydreaming state, and it's a lower frequency than beta waves. Theta is lower frequency than alpha waves, and their drowsiness are right after you fall asleep, and it's something you see in sleep. Delta is lower frequency than theta waves, and it's often you see delta in the third stage of sleep or deep sleep or in a coma. In sleep, the type of wave varies by stage. So here you can see a diagram of the different uh, brainwaves we just discussed. So you can see the frequency over here. It's very clustered in beta, which is alertness or being awake. Then it gets slower and slower. So alpha, theta, and delta. Delta is something you see in deep sleep, the third stage of sleep. Zeit, Zeitgebers are it's German for timers. So they're environmental time cues such as sunlight, alarm clocks, or social interaction that helps trigger an organism to maintain a circadian rhythm, as we discussed. Sleep stages, your brain goes through distinct brain patterns during sleep. There's four main stages that occur in 90-minute cycles. The first three stages are characterized by non-rapid eye movement sleep, so non-REM, N1, N2, and N3. Non-REM stage number one, it's dominated by theta waves. There's also some alpha waves, but it's mostly dominated by theta waves. There's strange sensation, so hypnagogic hallucinations, hearing or seeing things that aren't there. For example, seeing flash of light or someone calling your name, a doorbell, etc. Or the Tetris effect. If you play Tetris right before bed, you might see visual images of blocks during sleep. Or if you've been on a boat all day, you might feel like you're on the water even when you're on dry land. Also, a feeling of falling, so hypnic jerks, muscle twitches you sometimes experience as you fall asleep. Stage non-REM sleep stage number two. It's a deeper stage of sleep. People in non-REM sleep number two are harder to awaken, and we see more theta waves than N1, and we also see the sleep spindles and K complexes. There's much more research needed into sleep spindles and K complex, but this is what we know right now. So sleep spindles are a burst of rapid brain activity. Some researchers think that sleep spindles help inhibit certain perceptions so that we maintain a tranquil state during sleep. So sleep spindles in some parts of the brain are associated with the ability to sleep through loud sounds. K complexes suppress cortical arousal and keep you asleep. Also help sleep-based memory consolidation. Even though they occur naturally, you can make them occur by gently touching someone while they're sleeping. So for example, if you that touch was not threatening, stay asleep playing. So if you touch that person, it's just generally helping them stay asleep if it's not like something threatening or they perceive like the K complexes help with that. So N3, which is slow wave sleep, and it's very difficult to awaken, characterized by delta waves, and where sleepwalking and talking happens, and its declarative memory consolidation also happens in this stage. Lastly is REM or also known as rapid eye movement sleep. The eyes are rapidly moving beneath your eyelids and most of your other muscles are paralyzed. Most dreaming occurs during REM sleep, so muscle paralysis inhibits action so you don't act out your dreams. Most important for memory consolidation, formation of episodic memories, and consolidate procedural memories as well. It's a combination of alpha, beta, and desynchronous waves, and it's similar to beta waves as that you see when you're awake. It's sometimes called paradoxical sleep for this reason, because if you see someone awake and measure their brain waves with the EEG and someone in REM sleep, their brain waves look very similar. Waking up during REM sleep allows you to remember your dream, and there's more REM sleep later on and before you wake up. There's more deep sleep right as you go to bed. We'll see a diagram of this later on. So here you can see example of relaxed wakefulness. So in general, whenever you see relaxed, always think alpha waves, and awake is beta waves. Stage N1, you see the theta waves. Stage N2, you see the appearance of sleep spindles and K complexes from our introductory question. Stage N3 or deep sleep, you see these delta waves, very slow waves. And finally, REM or dreaming sleep, it looks like this. So very high frequency. And this is what I meant by REM sleep being, so just as you fall asleep, you go through all these stages. So one, two, three, four, and go back up four, three, two, one, and then REM sleep. But in general, whenever the more you sleep, you spend more time in REM sleep and less time in deep sleep. So at the beginning, you spend more time in deep sleep, and finally, at the end, when you're about to wake up, you spend more time on REM sleep. How long each stage lasts depends on how long you've been asleep and your age. So babies spend more time in REM sleep. Parasomnia, sleep disorders cause abnormal activities during sleep, such as sleep terrors or sleepwalking. Dysautonomia, sleep disorders cause troubles falling asleep or staying awake, such as obstructive sleep apnea. REM rebound refers to the increase of the frequency, depth, and intensity of REM sleep following sleep deprivation or significant stressors. For example, if one night you only had 3 hours of sleep, you missed a significant portion of REM sleep. So the following day, you might spend much more time in REM sleep opposed to going into deep sleep. I was wondering if anyone had any questions for the sleep section, sleep and consciousness. So the third section, which is drug dependence. So psychoactive drugs, they're drugs that can alter our consciousness and perceptions. They can alter our mood, calm us down, make us feel more alert, etc. They're classified by action and the effect they have on our bodies. There's four main categories of psychoactive drugs that you should keep in mind, which are depressants, stimulants, hallucinogens, opioids, and opioids. So a few examples are in this chart. So stimulants, cocaine, amphetamine, methamphetamine, nicotine, caffeine, opioids, also known as narcotics, heroin, morphine, opium, Demerol, depressants, alcohol, barbiturates, benzodiazepines, GHB, hallucinogen, uh, LSD, ecstasy, mushrooms. So group number one is depressants. They're drugs that lower your body's basic functions and neural activity. They lower CNS activity, decrease arousal stimulation in areas of our brain. So they decrease heart rate, decrease blood pressure, decrease processing and reaction time, and they make us think, act, and think more slowly. And this sort of ties in with example of alcohol, so it makes you think and act more slowly, slower reaction time as well. Stimulants, so drugs that excite your nerve CNS, increase heart rate, blood pressure, alertness, more awake, more energetic, can cause people to feel jittery. So what this reminds you of is drinking coffee. It does almost all of these things. Group number three is hallucinogens, also referred to as psychedelics. So distorted perceptions and hallucinations, seeing or hearing things that are different from how things are actually are. So heightened sensations based on reality, but it's different from what's going on in the world around. They can give them energy, give individuals energy or calm them down. There's emotional responses, feeling of connectedness, and mood swings, so changing moods. the exact different the exact effect that they have on individuals can be different depending on an individual's personality or who they are and who they're with. And lastly, group number four is opiates and opioids. So the distinction to keep in mind is opiates are natural, whereas opioids are synthetic and man-made. So like depressants, they decrease CNS function, they decrease heart rate, blood pressure, cause relaxation, and induce sleep, but they're not a depressant because they work on different mechanisms at the neurochemical level compared to depressants. They also reduce the perception of pain. That's why codeine and morphine are used during surgery, after surgery as well, to deal with the pain, and they lead to euphoria. That's why they're taken recreationally. So we have a practice passage via Jack Weston. Oh, sorry, I missed the question for what's the most important thing to remember for sleep. So the most important thing I would say for sleep is to keep in mind the four stages of sleep. So N1, N2, N3, and N4, and what happens in each stage, as well as the brain waves that occur during that stage. So remembering these brain waves in general, and also keeping in mind the four stages that occur in 90-minute cycles. So N1, N2, and N3, as well as REM sleep. I think that's most important to keep in mind for sleep. No problem. Did anyone have any questions for the drug dependent section?
I'm sorry, could you just go back to the like opioid slide for a
Yeah,
second? I just want to like reread it and
yeah,
like write a few things down.
yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
No problem.
Would we also need to know like barbiturates? Is that like another group that we'd need to know, or is that like a smaller group of drugs under like a bigger umbrella term?
Yeah, that's a great question. So barbiturates fall under the group of depressants. So barbiturates, benzodiazepine, and I think the third group is alcohol. Does everyone have the passage ready? I'll start the timer now. So time's up. So this was a passage about sleep and its relation to different factors, and more of like a statistics type of passage as well. So here you see distribution of MEQ scores TST based on morningness and eveningness. So question number one, which of the following is true regarding the MEQ data distribution? So I was wondering what students put for this question. So I see 1A in the chat. Would you like to explain your reasoning or?
I mean, I can. I didn't really love this question,
Yeah.
but this kind of by like process of elimination was kind of the only one
Okay.
that seemed like it worked. Also the mode, it just seemed like there was like a lot more people. Yeah, that's all I'm
Okay.
gonna say. Actually,
Yeah. Okay.
I'm gonna confuse myself. Sorry.
No problem. Yeah. So I'll go over the responses one by one. So the mean MEQ score is right shifted compared to the mode MEQ score. So we can look at figure number one. So the mode is always the most popular data value or the most prevalent data value. So the most prevalent data value is somewhere here. I think this is 2468. Should be around 62. And then this curve, it helps you see the mean. So the mean is around here. So that tells you that the mean is to the left of the mode. So returning back to this question, it tells you that the mean is left shifted compared to the mode MEQ score. Another quick shortcut to tell if it's left shifted or right shifted is that you can see the skew. So over here, you see that this graph on the right side, it's tall and then it's skewed to the left. So if it's skewed to the left, that means that the mean is left shifted compared to the mode. And if it's, let's say it's right skewed, then the mean would be right skewed, right shifted to the mode. Uh, Response B is more participants have the evening chronotype than the morning chronotype. So in this one, uh, I think the evening was 41 and below indicate evening types, and scores of 59 and above indicate morning types. So 41 and below and 59 and above. So 41 and below would be here, and then you look below, and then 40 and then 59 and above would be over here. So if you look at the data values, 59 and above is this whole chunk over here, and 41 below is over here. So there's less people in the evening time compared to the morning type. And C is approximately 90 individuals had the mode MEQ score. So this is more of like a estimation type of question. So the mode is this bar over here, which is like 62, 64. And then you look over here. So you know it's slightly less than 20%. And also the passage tells you 359 young adults. Estimate that to be 360. So 360 and 20% of that would be 72. So 72 individuals over here, but they tell you approximately 90 individuals had the mode MEQ score. So 72 would be less, and that's only because we estimated I think it would be less than 72. So it would be much less than 90. And the median value is a better measure of central tendency than the mean value of the for the data. So this returns us back to the first uh, class where we talked about statistics. So whenever you have like a perfect bell-shaped graph where it's symmetrical, then the mean would be a good measure of central tendency. But whenever you have skewed data like this, so this would be a left skewed graph, the median would be a better measure. And the median is when you take all the data values, you order them from least to greatest, and then take the middle value. So the best response over here would be D. So the measures of central tendency. So here is example of right skewed and left skewed. Does that make sense? So question number 2 was, which of the following is a threat to the generalizability of the experiment in the passage? If you, I was wondering if students wanted to share their response for this question. So I'll go over the responses one by one for this one as well. So generalizability. So also returning back to the first class, more of like statistics and research methods. There's two types of validity: internal validity and there's also external validity. Internal validity deals with everything within your experiment. Can you really maintain a cause and effect relationship? Is everything valid? The recording instruments you're using and things like that. Whereas generalizability is related to external validity. How does this study relate to the outside world? And like if it's too constructed within a lab, it's not really generalizable to the outside world. So response A is the use of broad inclusion criteria. So that would not really be a threat to generalizability. It would actually be a good thing. So a broad inclusion criteria, if it's too specific, then you'd only be capturing a small sample of the population. B is the awareness of participants that they're being monitored. Uh, so this, so whenever you're being monitored, this could affect the generalizability of the experiment. So they might they might act in a different way compared to their normal situation, their normal behavior. And C is participants being allowed to sleep in their normal environment. So this would help generalizability as you're not sleeping in like a lab condition, more of like a natural state for individuals, which would be in their own bed. So D is the use of a source population that is similar to the general population. This would also help the generalizability because if you have a sample that's close to the general population that you want to study, the results could be much more applicable to them opposed to just having a group of individuals that don't match the general population. So it can't really be extrapolated to them. So here, the best response would be B, the awareness of participants that they're being monitored. C is Question number 3 is which of the following is most likely to be measured in a patient in REM sleep versus a patient in deep sleep? I is higher respiratory rate during REM sleep. 2 is increased melatonin secretion from the pineal gland during REM sleep. And 3 is increased parasympathetic nervous system activity during REM sleep. So if students want to share your response in the chat. So I see 1B. We can look at the three responses together. So in REM sleep compared to deep sleep, REM sleep is much more like compared to being awake. So in deep sleep, your breathing decreases, more of like a parasympathetic activity. Whereas REM sleep, it's more of like a arousal state. So think about like in a fight or flight response, but not as extreme. So some your breathing increases, your sympathetic activity increases. So in REM sleep, you would see a higher respiratory rate during REM sleep. You would see sympathetic activity uh, and other things related to fight or flight. The increased melatonin secretion from the pineal gland during REM sleep, there's there's nothing really supporting this one. It's just REM sleep is breathing is higher compared to deep sleep, and there's more arousal and increased parasympathetic nervous system activity during REM sleep. So increased it would this would be the correct response if it said increased sympathetic nervous system activity during REM sleep, but that's actually during deep sleep. So here the best response would be A. So I was wondering if you had if there are any other questions for this question.
I didn't really have a question. My justification for like the answer
Yeah,
B was just that like I know that like REM is technically like part of sleep,
yeah,
but I wasn't sure if 2 was correct. So I was just like if you're in a higher state of arousal, maybe you want to like calm the body into sleep
yeah,
more by
yeah,
melatonin,
yeah,
but you just said that it doesn't like have evidence that that's true.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, in terms of REM sleep, just uh, I just try to keep in mind just two things: more arousal and well, breathing is also related. So basically, think about sympathetic nervous system activity and a person awake. So if you're in deep sleep, your breathing rate decreases. Your I think temperature decreases. Whereas in REM sleep, these things increase. So similar to the biology section, you learned like fight or flight versus rest and digest. I think that's applicable over here as well. For question number 4, in the replication of the study findings using the same participants, several participants who had been measured to have a TST less than 5 were then found to have a TS total sleep time greater than 9. Which phenomenon best explains this observation? So I was wondering what students put for this one. So I see 1D in the chat. if you want to share your reasoning. Or I can.
I guess I just thought that like dysomnias have to do sometimes with like having a hard time falling asleep or like waking up a lot.
Yeah.
So actually, I don't even know. Just explain it.
Uh,
I'm like a little dehydrated, so haven't been doing too well. You can just answer it.
uh, so, uh, essentially, total sleep time is less than 5. So I think less than 5 hours. And then all of a sudden, they the next time was a total sleep time greater than 9. So insomnia is deals more with like a falling asleep. So something like, so it doesn't really deal with the total sleep time. So REM rebound is, remember, like if you have less sleep, you have more REM sleep the next time. And related to this could be just the increase in the total amount of sleep as well. To have this more REM sleep, you're sort of like in a sleep depth. So less than 5, and all of a sudden the next time they have more than 9 hours of sleep. So this could be a considered an example of REM rebound, because if you have less than 5 hours of sleep, you're sleep deprived, and then you want, the next time you want to catch up on your REM sleep that you missed during your 5 hours of sleep. So during this 9 hours of sleep, you get to catch up on your REM sleep from yesterday, and then for the today, you get to have like that. That's why you sleep more in this case. Parasinomia. So in this case, it would be dealing with more in terms of like falling asleep and abnormal behavior during sleep as well. So this deals more in terms of the behaviors and like uh, having problems during sleep. But in this case, the total sleep time increases. So both C and D would not be as applicable in this case. It's more of like problems with sleep. So like parasinomia are like category of sleep disorders that involve abnormal behaviors during sleep. And dysphonias are category of sleep disorders that involve abnormal, impaired sleep quality or affected total sleep time. So in this case, if it was less total sleep time, then that those would be applicable. But the only one that deals with increase in total sleep time is B, which would be REM rebound. I was wondering if that made sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. I guess I was just assuming that like the REM rebound would just mean that like more time was given to REM, not that people were sleeping longer. But you're saying that REM rebound includes like overall like total sleep time increases, and that's why REM increases, not that the body just does it.
Yeah, even in the case that uh, if you had 5 hours of sleep before and then 5 hours of sleep the next day, so if you always sleep deprived, you would spend more time in REM sleep. It's more of like even the process of elimination of like the other three responses deal with problems of sleep, so less total sleep time. And so that's why B would be like not the most uh the odd one out, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah. Question 5 is, which of the following statements does not correctly describe how a theory of motivation could have been used to entice people toward participating in the experiment? So they talk about incentive theory, drive reduction theory, cognitive theory, and humanistic theory. So I was wondering what students put for this one. So I see one B in the chat. Would you like to explain your reasoning or can explain? Okay. So I
You've been muted this whole time. I didn't realize you were talking.
sorry. I can explain it. So A is incentive theory suggests that uh, individuals could have been monetarily compensated. So whenever you think about incentive theory, think about incentives such as money. So in this case, this would be applicable. Whereas incentive theory, if you provide the participants monetary compensation, it helps provide them with a reason to participate in the experiment. B is drive reduction theory. So dealing with this name, it tries to reduce drives such as thirst or hunger, and it suggests that individuals could have been provided free food. So free food deals with reducing the drive of hunger, so that's applicable in this case as well. C is cognitive theory, suggests that individuals could have been previously acted as participants in similar experiments. So in this case, cognitive theory deals more with thoughts and previous experiences, and this provides you with more confidence in your behavior and actions in the future. So C is also applicable. And D is where the phrase tries to trick you with one single word, and if the single word was switched out for another word, it would have been correct. So humanistic theory suggests that individuals could have been extrinsically motivated to actualize themselves by contributing to the common good. So in this case, humanistic theory deals with intrinsic motivation to reach your higher self and self-actualize and contributing to the common good. So if it said humanistic theory suggests that individuals could have been intrinsically motivated to actualize themselves by contributing to the common good, that would have been correct. But as they stated extrinsically, so it's not correct, which would be the correct answer for this question.
I have a question. So
Yeah,
I like understand drive reduction theory, but
yeah.
I put B because it's like, I mean, like I know it's like, fulfilling your needs, but like does that apply if like you're not hungry? Like, yeah, they're giving you free food, but like does it count if like the person's not hungry? Like then it's not reducing the drive if the drive isn't there.
Yeah. So in this question, it's that could be reasoning as well. So it says like, which of the following statements does not correctly describe how a theory of motivation could have been used to entice people? So it's just like describe how a theory of motivation could have been used. So in this case, it's not like dealing with if they're hungry or not hungry. It let's say participants are at school and it's at lunchtime and you're advertising to study this, then it would be a good example of the drive reduction theory. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Lastly, 6, which of the following would not be considered a Zeitgeber? So that's German for timer. So I was wondering if students wanted to share your response for this one. So I see 1D in the chat, which is the correct answer. So I was wondering if you wanted to explain your reasoning.
I think the reasoning is that like Zeitgeber is just like has to be like external.
Yeah.
So anything intrinsic is not related.
Yep. That's great. So yeah, everything extrinsic. So A, B, C, D is extrinsic and D is intrinsic. So that would be not considered a Zeitgeber, also known as a timer. So yeah, D is correct. So lastly, finishing off with tips for the psychology, sociology section. There's a lot of terms for psychology to know, so it's good to use flashcards early, such as applications such as Quizlet or Anki. Include examples of terms that are difficult to remember. Set a time to review and review frequently. Remember decay theory. So in memory, always try to review the concepts so that it doesn't decay, and practice identifying variables in passages, so independent variable versus dependent. As you often see, like statistics is directly related to like psychology, sociology sections. Like the chemistry section, you see graphs, but they don't directly ask you statistics question directly, as we saw like the central tendency, the mean, median, and mode. So it's good to know about like the IV, dependent variable control. There's a Khan Academy video notes, 2 sets available of different sizes, and reminders to keep up with readings and do problem/practice on what we are discussed today in session. And lastly, a survey to improve the course. So if you have not done so already, please fill out the survey just so we can know how we could better help. So that's it for today. I was wondering if anyone had any other questions.
I have a question. How
Yeah.
would you like? Because I know the document is really helpful and I have it.
Yeah.
I just don't feel like I'm using it correctly because I just feel like reading it and like taking notes is just
Yeah.
like not the best way to use it. So like, how would you suggest using it?
So I would suggest using it as more of like a summary after you've done your readings. For example, let's say you read the Kaplan book, some set of MCAT books such as Kaplan or Princeton or Exam Crackers, and you've gained your knowledge from there and the understanding and the concepts and everything. And I would say after you're done all that, it would be a good this 100-page or 300-page document would be a good summary, because since there's no rarely any pictures or diagrams, it's more of like a summary. And before your test, you could do like 10 days, 10 pages every day. I think that would give you a good backing to just to refresh everything you knew. And sometimes they don't go into much detail, so reading it after would be great.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, I remember reading the 300-page document. It seems like a lot, and then I was reading like 25 pages a day. It was too much, especially at the beginning. So I would say 10 pages is good. So you'd be finished in a month. So thank you everyone for joining today, and have a good night.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.